Welcome back to the Northern Sentinels podcast. I'm your host, Chris Ayat. On this episode, I kick off my expert series on national security technologies. There are a number of topics I want to profile on the show, and I'm starting with cyber. My guest today is the CEO of the Canadian cybersecurity company Esentire. J. Paul Haynes was raised in Oakville, Ontario, and spent his youth playing sports, tinkering with anything mechanical, and playing in a band. He found his way to the University of Guelph, where he earned an engineering degree and started his business career. A serial entrepreneur, Jay was involved in a multitude of companies before he landed in his current job. We get into how cyber defense works, and Jay gives an honest assessment of our vulnerabilities in Canada and what we need to do to protect ourselves and our critical infrastructure. Make sure you take a second to subscribe to The Greater Good on Substack and help support the NSP and other content development. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with J. Paul Haynes. Jay, welcome to the show. Thanks for having me at your house.
Well, glad to be here, and thanks for making the trek out here.
It's such a nice, we were talking before here, it's such a nice part of the world, sort of down here, sort of Guelph region. It's great, like out in the countryside and just beautiful.
Yeah, it's very peaceful, and 10 minutes to the city. So we tried living in the city, first in the country, then back to the city, and then we kind of missed that, so we came back here.
Yeah, peace and quiet is certainly not overrated in any way, shape, or form. That's for sure. Why don't we kick things off with a bit of family background? Is your family from this region originally? Did you grow up in this region? What's the roots of your family?
Well, I ended up in Guelph after going to university here. But my family, I was born in Toronto, in Ford Nation, I guess they call it now. But and we moved to Oakville when I was 4. So I grew up in Oakville, and my parents had always entrepreneurs, always had their own business. They were specialists in tax preparation, built a company like H&R Block, which they ultimately sold to H&R Block in 91. So, it was all finance. Dinner table conversations were, everything, about, cash flows and unit sales and all this kind of stuff. And I said, well, I'm clearly going into some other domain. And I guess that was sort of, set when I started taking apart lawnmowers and stuff when I was 10. And I also have a brother who's younger than me, 4 years younger, and he went off into business and he works at TD as a senior exec and has been in that track the whole time. So my cousins went into accounting. It's like everyone was going that direction. So by 12, I had started my first business building what are now called BMX bikes. You couldn't buy them, so we would take the CCM Mustang platform and buy the knobby tires and change all the handlebars and everything and make trail bikes. And I learned a lot about business because I'd build them for people and sell them to them. And I remember one that I built, I sold to a doctor's son, and it was $20, and that was a lot back then. And I had hard cash in this thing, and he wasn't paying me. So I'm knocking on the door, and I said to the father, I got to take the bike back because I need to sell it to somebody else who will pay me. Kid's crying in the background. $20 came out of his wallet pretty quick, and then I learned how collections worked.
Repo.
Yeah.
So, a couple of things out of that. So is your family sort of longtime Torontonians?
No, my father's family was from Colborne, and my mother was from St. Catharines. Her father, who I never met either of my grandfathers. Her father was an agricultural scientist, worked for the government, lectured at Guelph and Cornell, and he was a specialist in modern developing modern methods. And ironically, there's a whole long other story here. I was doing a speech at a conference. I was sitting beside George Hofstetter, who was given the Order of Canada for basically creating the wine industry. And I said, "Oh, you might have known my grandfather." We're having a conversation over lunch, and he goes, "Gerald Chamberlain, yeah, I shouldn't have got this. It was his idea that created the wine industry." So apparently, just after World War II, he had this idea on how to grow the varietals from Europe and treat them with some chemicals so that the mold wouldn't destroy them, which was what the problem was. And it's quite advanced now. It's a booming industry, but they were able to figure this out. And so because the government at the time wouldn't invest in that kind of research officially, he was allotted something like a 5-acre plot. That's what George told me. 5 acres. I'm not going to keep track of that. You can do all your experiments there, and that's where they made the discovery. So unfortunately, but when he was getting the Order of Canada, you have to be alive to receive it, and my grandfather had passed before that happened. But George was very adamant that it should have been his, and so I never knew that. So I met him speaking at a conference on doing automation and controls for fermentation. I was doing all this research in my master's that was related to ethanol production, which if you know how the petroleum industry works, it's used as an octane extender, and it also you can have up to 10% ethanol in certain petroleum mixtures.
Okay.
You've probably seen the signs on the gas pumps, and that was to sort of reduce the dependency on fossil fuels. And all the research was sponsored by Energy Mines and Resources, the agency at the time, and there was no fuel industry in Canada. The only industry was the potable alcohol industry. So we did research with Gilby's distillery and in the wine industry. So I was basically explaining how you can measure. We developed a sensor that would get very early stages of alcohol production in the fermenters, and you can make control, like from an engineering perspective, you can make control adjustments to get desired outcomes. And so we had the control system and the sensor, and I was explaining to a bunch of gray-haired winemakers that you can do all this with a computer control system. We call it SCADA, or Internet of Things nowadays. But that was my master's, and that was probably a bit of a highlight that was completely unexpected,
random.
And then, of course, I said to my mother, "How come you didn't tell me about any of this stuff?" And she didn't really know the whole story. So the secret was with George and my grandfather. And then on my father's side, his father was an entrepreneur, and he had a bunch of different businesses in Colborne. And so I guess my father had his own business, and we'll get into some of the engineering background. But when I was finishing my master's, I'd already started my first company, and then there was a whole trajectory there.
Okay, so you've got to come from this family of entrepreneurs. I'm just curious, where did the mechanical piece come in? Because you talked about how sitting around the dinner table was all about finance, and but you're tearing apart lawnmowers and doing this. So where did that mechanical inclination come from?
I'm going to go with Lego.
Yeah,
because I was a huge into Lego. It was a really big thing until you sort of maxed out on Lego, and then you need real things. And patterns repeat themselves. My son was even more voracious in Lego, and he's just finished his master's in mechanical engineering. So it's interesting. And then my daughter, she's planning to go into engineering school too. So I don't know if it's nature or nurture in terms of the environment, but for me, I would credit with that's got to be a part of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so other than sort of tearing apart lawnmowers and building BMX bikes and businesses, how else did you spend your childhood, growing up in Toronto and Oakville?
Yeah, in Oakville, it was a lot of hockey. My father, that was an important part of his growing up and ours. My brother did better. He was on the travel team. I was in the house league team, but my father ended up coaching us. It was a weird situation. The coach, when we were around 12, was dealing drugs to some of the kids on the team. And of course, that was a really bad thing. So my father got thrust into coaching. He ended up taking it over. And then, everything he did, he went as deep as you could go into it, and on the boards and organizing committees and all that stuff. So we would play the house league schedule, which is 25 or something games, and then we'd have tournaments. We were playing not as much as rep players, but almost as much. So there's a lot of hockey in my growing up, and then other sports, obviously, in the summer months. And
what was your mom doing when as you were growing up?
Oh, she was probably my brother and I might argue the stronger part of the business. Doing all of the people relations. They had hundreds of staff, but my father preferred to work at home because he didn't like getting asked questions about what kind of paper clips to buy. And so my mother would work in the office. So she sort of had the HR hat as well as all of the business operations. And
yeah, it is a heavy lift, right? The HR part. I certainly look back on my career, and probably some of the best and the most challenging parts of the career always involving people, without a doubt. So you're in school now. Like, how did you sort of figure out? Do you have any idea about the trajectory you wanted to go? Because you're playing sports, your business, mechanical, all these different things. Like, at what point did it coalesce, or did you sort of jump around from thinking like, when I'm done school, I want to go do this?
Well, high school was interesting. I had a program in grade 8 where you could get one math credit, grade 9 math. So I got grade 9 math when I went in, and that was 5 years for high school, probably the same when you went.
Yeah.
And so then, I was in a band, and that was going to be the future. And
what type of music was the band?
And what type of music? Oh yeah. Well, we were at the time it would be like Ted Nugent, and I wanted to play Yes and progressive music, and the band wanted to go down the Black Sabbath path, and so the band ended. There's a whole long story there, but then got the girlfriend, decided I'm going to university, I wanted to be in engineering, and then I finished high school in 4 years. I took the 6 prerequisite courses,
the OACs.
Yeah, and then I skipped grade 12 and missed taking one geography class or something. But that was how I got. So I'm 18 and when I started engineering school, and then I think we were talking earlier about I was on this Coast Guard ship for Environment Canada. So I applied to that job in the summer. I had that for 3 years, and then I'm out in the middle of Lake Ontario in August, and one of my classmates who's up in Yellowknife says, "Hey, I got a job for you up here. I'll come back to the computer side of it. It's basically like the equivalent of a computer senior analyst, but nobody from Ottawa wants to take the job, so we can fund it in this government agency. But you got to get up here in 2 weeks." And so I said, okay, and I did it. And so
this was during university?
Yeah. So I've done 3 years of engineering school.
Yeah.
I can see the finish line. As the engineering, the weeder years are already behind you if you've got through year 3. And so then they had introduced co-op for that year, which I was racing the finish line at that time, and then they put all of that term into co-op. So I went into co-op engineering in the first cohort and did a 12-month term, and then the word on the street amongst my fellow students was, once he takes money, he's never coming back. But it wasn't to be. I did that, and then I came back, but the work experience was so sort of, what's the word, formative or pivotal in terms of, the classes you didn't want to take were, public speaking and English writing. And what did I switch my classes to for 4th year? The option classes, I switched to those because once you realize in the business setting, those things are really essential. So that was, super worthwhile. But how we got there, if we go back to first year of engineering school.
Sorry, how did you decide? I mean, because right now, having just gone through the university selection process with my child, I mean, it's all out there, obviously online. It's, huge marketing campaigns and everything else, but that wasn't the case back when so how did you pick? You're in Oakville. How did you decide? Lots of options. How do you decide where you wanted to go?
Okay, so I had, if you remember back when we were applying to school, you needed something like an 85 to get in engineering school. And I had 85, but I didn't know that I was going to finish, like that you would apply before your final marks were in. And so I thought, I ended up with something around an 80. And so I had applied to Queen's, Waterloo, and McMaster. And when you had a one last shot to change the schools around, and I thought I wasn't going to have a high enough grade. And Queens was where, my father and my mother went to Queens, and they had paid very diligently into all the requests for, funding and stuff. And, I didn't even get the, I just got the reject letter.
The thin envelope.
And so then, that enraged my father. He said, we pay so much money into that. Anyways, we discussed it, and I said, well, okay, we'll just throw Guelph in there as an option. So then McMaster gave me nuclear physics. I applied for nuclear engineering or eng physics there, and they said, well, we'll put you into nuclear physics, and then you can, if your marks are good enough, you can move into engineering. So I had, I was on the cusp, but that was the lead up to that was the band and not doing all the stuff that I needed. So I went from not going to finish high school in the teacher's eyes to all of a sudden he's taking all the grade 13 courses and he's out. And so I did a lot of catch up there. Advice for any kids is stay with it all the way through, because you can't make up that time. Time is, as we get older, we get to understand how valuable it is. So that was sort of how I ended up at Guelph. So I said, well, I really actually want to do engineering, and water resources was a big and up and coming area. So, which is basically civil engineering, the way it was categorized with APEO at the time. So I switched everything to Guelph. I had an apartment at McMaster in Hamilton, and on August 30th, I said, "Screw it, I'm going to Guelph." And then I decided to come and find an apartment here, and all of that. And as you know, the first day of school is Thursday after Labor Day, so all that happened in 1 minute.
Rapid fire. And, okay, so what was university life like then? How did you like engineering? How did you like the transition from
meant
high school?
To be? Yeah, like you were an adult, and you were sort of expected to behave as an adult, which meant that you had to be responsible for all your own work. I mean, you typically are getting responsibility, and in high school, parents nudging you to make sure all your homework is done, but now you're on your own. That's a long time ago, and. So I had developed an affinity for developing software. I self-taught. There was a ZX80 based computer that was relatively inexpensive called a Sinclair, and I got one of those, and I had a summer job during high school that it was kind of like Einstein in the patent office. He had a lot of time to think. There wasn't much work to do. And there's one of these jobs in a sort of snack bar that people only come in occasionally. So I started programming. I got this book called Lady Luck, and it was all the math behind gambling. And so I started programming gambling games, and you had to load it each time because it didn't have any storage, and load each time. And I basically play poker against the till. And that was how I self-taught programming. And, that was probably grade 9, 10 kind of time frame. And so you fast forward to first year of engineering, they get 3 IBM PCs and they lock them in a room. And my buddy Vic and I, we knew what to do with these. And we asked, what can we get? No, it's for the grad students. None of the grad students knew what to do. Like, they were coming out of the punch card era, and getting time on the mainframe, or getting access to a terminal, that type stuff like that. So we're in that era. And so we went to the chairman of the school and we said, look, we want to get in here. We're going to actually do our classes in these things. So we got at them, and we were there was also the era of the portable pocket computers, like the Sharps and some of the HPs, and so we were writing all the programs for the math, like linear equation solving and stuff like that, and spreadsheets. There was a thing called SuperCalc back in the day, and we were using that to do things that were thought to be impossible, and it really changed things. I remember. By year 2, I was writing a systems design exam, and I asked if I can bring they said you can bring any inanimate object into, like, as open book exams. You remember how much fun they were. Bring any inanimate object into the exam, and I had this calculator with all, and I said, well, I'm going to use the programs I built for this class. He said, well, then you have to give us a printout of that, and so I had a printer. So I was basically done the 2-hour exam in 20 minutes. You get the question and 5 blank pages, and I write the answer down, stapled the program to it, and then so I'm out, and the only thing was disturbing the other students printing this thing out. It was kind of funny, and then you kind of learned software copyright. They said, after that, they all bought the same thing. And can I have that program? No, but I'll show you how to do it. And of course, they didn't want to learn how to do it. So that was kind of interesting. We would help each other and teach each other that were prepared to learn, but we weren't giving it away. But not even thinking, software licensing or anything. It was just didn't seem right. And so that was the beginning. And then of course.
Was there something specific that was really compelling to you about computers, about software, that really drew you in? Like, at what point did you go, like this is what I want to do, something in this domain?
I looked at them as more of we have a better set of tools to do engineering, and there's a huge opportunity here in just redefining how engineering was going to CAD was just CAD was a drafting tool,
computer assisted drafting,
assisted drafting, but computer aided design. So they had CADD, computer assisted drafting and design. So the design is really where it's got to today, and for example, my son, who's just done his master's, did a lot of it in SolidWorks, did finite element modeling, did computational fluid dynamics. All of that is embedded underneath the data managed by the design tool. And we were doing those by hand back then. So it's come a long way. But that's how cars are built with these tools now. And the whole world has progressed dramatically because of these tools. So I was sort of at the I didn't really know where it was going to go, but at the very early front end of that. That sort of led, I pursued some, this is going to sound funny, in 1987, AI, 88 sort of time frame, AI.
Okay.
Yeah, and there was, I remember Marvin Minsky was the big brain at MIT doing AI. Now, AI back then was basically complex programs that would do, they called it forward chaining. It would come out to a deterministic answer, but if you think in programming terms, it was, if, else if, else if, else if. You might have 20 or 30 of those, and there's some elegant ways and tools to program it that, but at the end, you're going to get one of the answers of the 20 or 50 or 100 options in there, versus in our current world, it's determining what the right answer is in a much more human brain analogy than what we were doing back in the day. But I developed, had an article published in the engineering magazine on how AI could aid in engineering decision making, and the project was quite interesting. Interviewed a bunch. This is now in my career as an engineer, civil engineer, doing this kind of stuff. And I interviewed a bunch of retiring engineers from the Indian and Northern Affairs Department at the time, which was in Manitoba, and they were the ones that were doing all the engineering and design work for all the First Nations. And they had a 5-year pool of money, which was something like $500 million, and they had hundreds or maybe 1,000 projects, and prioritizing them to be fair and equal was what the mission was. And all these old dudes were retiring, and so they had to capture all of this knowledge. And so, of course, they said this is impossible. And I interviewed and basically this team of maybe, it was 8 or 10 engineers, they made 100 decisions max. A lot of times it was 10. And they had the way they made the decision for electrification or a parks and rec facility or a water treatment plant. Basically follow, as you know, in engineering, everything is basically governed by a few equations: input minus output equals storage, and variations of that was how we got to. There's only 100 decisions you guys are making, and so then we tested it, and of course it was more consistent. But it was, I remember doing the demo in front of the director general, and you hit go, and then there's this awkward silence while the lights are dimming, and it's using all the power that it can get, and then then the answers come out. So that was written up. It was celebrated as this is what we can do. This is the future, and we've come so far from then. It was revolutionary at the time because you were comparing it to a bunch of human labor and paper-based stuff. But compared to where we are today, it's like another planet.
Now, when you sort of when you wrapped up your time with your undergrad, kind of similar to coming out of any transition, did you have a sense of where you wanted to go? Did you already have an option available? Like, what was the first sort of big step coming out of university?
So I had the skill that nobody had and everyone wanted, which was this dude can do that computer stuff. And so I had choices. I had to make decisions. One of them, I had basically do the lead on modeling. As a junior engineer, you have to article for then as a couple of years, it's 5 now to get your PEng. And so I wanted to work in engineering, and of course I was trained in all the civil disciplines. So how do I apply this in the civil discipline? And so I had some choices, and it came down to a company in Orangeville named R.J. Burnside. That was my first job as like the 28th employee there. There are hundreds and hundreds and multiple offices, global firm now. And then another one in Toronto that was the project was, and you'll recognize this one, in certain neighborhoods, some of the wealthiest neighborhoods, they have combined sewers, and every time it rains, the sewage overflows into the river and the beaches get closed.
Right.
The project was to design the system to fix that. Guess what? It hasn't happened. They still have that going on. Because, of course, those wealthy neighborhoods had influence. They didn't want their whole street dug up for years probably. So it hasn't got fixed yet, and it's still a problem. So, but that was the one that was really like the modeling on that was pretty advanced. I went to Burnside, and I was basically I was in the trenches as an engineer, civil engineer, doing stuff that you sort of think you get to do in year 4 or 5, but the smaller firm you get way more opportunities. So I learned all kinds of stuff really quickly there that I probably wouldn't have got at a big firm. So it was the right decision.
Were you running any businesses at the time? Because obviously you had this sort of entrepreneurial spirit from the early days.
I had maybe a side hustle on developing software for financial modeling software,
right? Because
I knew how to do that, and so that was that business. So Burnside's it was great. Then I get offered this master's that was fully funded, not like the regular stipend, but it was like a salary almost comparable to what I was making at Burnside.
Okay.
And it was exactly in the thing that I wanted to do all the time. So now after working at Burnside doing civil engineering, there's a lot of it that wasn't, computer automation and design. I was kind of one of the guys to do that, but that wasn't everything. And you had to do all the regular civil engineering. You had to do stuff with, government agencies to get permits, and that stuff gets old pretty quick, depending on your personality and tolerance for that. So let's just say it didn't work for me. So I didn't know if that was going to be the path. And then I get you can do this. They called it SCADA, Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition, or they call it the IoT now, Internet of Things. So that is where I went in the master's. And
so who offered you the master's?
Guelph. It was a different professor, like in a different department in engineering. It was in sort of the biochemical engineering side. It's not the civil stream that I knew. So that was that drew me in, and I went there and stayed working with Burnsides, and that's actually so I continued working with them and did that AI project that I was mentioning earlier.
Yeah. Okay. So what was the goal of taking the master's? I mean, obviously it's enticing to go back and do something like that. But did you have a sense beyond that of like, I'm going to do this, and then I'll be able to do X, Y, and Z?
It was solving a very complicated math problem. I can go into that in a second, and condensing that down to a microcontroller that you could put on a shop floor to make real-time decisions. So how do you take the engineer brain, all the calculations, stuff that you could do in writing programs and complex spreadsheets, and how do you make that thing run a machine? And so the domain in control theory, there's 2 types of control systems. One is closed loop, and the other is open loop. And in the world of bio, in the example I was mentioning earlier with the creating alcohol to power cars, you have a very nonlinear reaction. So your control system has to constantly retune based on environmental parameters. And the parameter that we were modeling was a living organism, which is the yeast. And the yeast goes through transitions, and you had to change set points in control all the time to achieve the outcome. So you'd have the business outcome in industrial alcohol is maximum alcohol yield and minimum tank time. And we were able to take 10% of the tank time out. So 55 would become 50 hours, and we could get from 10.1 to 10.5% with the substrates that we were using. So in industrial engineering terms, like that's a once in a lifetime gain. So this was what they were after, and so the control system that ran all of this, we based it on the chip that had just been designed by Motorola for the anti-lock brake system of the pickup trucks, or that their cars. And this was around 85 or 6 is when they came out with that. So we're using this completely repurposed for making a smart controller, not like a PID controller, but this one had it would do all the PID stuff, but you could actually programmatically change the gain schedule based on the state of the organism. So that was pretty revolutionary. So so this whole thing started in a null hypothesis. So we had this hypothesis that the way the technology worked, that it had a pressure dependency, so where it was situated in the tank would affect how the sensors behaved. The sensor there was a very preliminary prototype, and so that was what there's a master's in this, and so we did the first 3 months of experiments and determined that there wasn't a master's in this. There's actually no variation on pressure, then explaining why that was. And then I got into Einstein's theory of Brownian motion. Onsager, who was the ultimate researcher who had designed all these equations for simultaneous heat, mass, and momentum transfer. And this is like a badass math problem to solve. So, I've got all my papers, and I walk over to the math department, and I said, "Can you help me get the equation?" Like, I'm an engineer, so this is like pretty advanced stuff. And they started laughing. I said, "Well, you can't solve that equation." "Oh, okay." So it is a hard problem to solve. So then it was a numerical method, and we applied finite elements to that problem. So finite element modeling is an approximation method, and that's how when you do a bridge design, it's actually indeterminate because it's not fixed at one side, but your model is fixed at one side, the other side can move. But in the real world, both ends are free, so that's an indeterminate problem. So we do finite element modeling to get to a very minutia level of precision, but you can never get to the exact answer. So we use that same method to model the transfer of the alcohol molecules through a membrane that was then with a gas flowing taking the dissolved alcohol. So it's going from a liquid to a gaseous state through a membrane, and then presenting that to a flame ionization detector, and that would generate a voltage that would vary based on what the concentration was. So all of that was, now that's a PhD. And I had all the grade, you had to do a bunch of courses. I had the grade point average. I went to the chairman of the department and said, "I want to switch to a PhD. I can be done in a year and a half." And quite shockingly, he says to me, "Well, what happens if your girlfriend gets pregnant?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Like, what if you stall out and you don't get you don't finish your PhD?" I said, "I can see the finish line here. It's just going to take another year and a half, or otherwise, it could be done in 3 or 4 months." And he said, "So why don't you just get your master's? And if you're still really keen on getting a PhD, then we will get you to the PhD program." So what I didn't know, the backstory was there was a student who had started this project, and in the middle of his master's, that happened. And so,
so it seems very random thing to say.
It was very random. So, but I didn't get the backstory till later. So then I just was on a race to finish, and I had all this other business going on. So I was doing quite well. I had the new pickup truck, the ski boat, parked outside the school. I do the balance of 30 or whatever hours a week of school, and same for all the business stuff. So I basically graduated my master's into my first company, and that's how so I've been unemployable ever since, you could say. As an entrepreneur, you can't not do it, right? So that was my first business that ended up building document or drawing management software for engineering use cases. So this would be the problem we were solving was in public works, the as built and the as designed are never rectified. So the records in public works might be dig here, and they didn't get the fiber optic telco company had just put a line in there. So that was the use case. They'd caused a couple 100,000 damage, interrupting communications by digging up a fiber line that they had the file but they didn't have it available to the guy in the truck. So design a system that you could do that. So that was the first piece of software I developed called Drawman, and as we're working in utilities and public works departments were the customers for that, and I saw one of the utility CEOs from Newmarket Hydro. He said, "Hey, I got another problem I want you to have a look at," and that problem was basically their billing system. As an engineer, you're sort of taught in school that we are authorities on everything, and it's humbling actually starting a business because you realize that's not true, and there's nothing more humbling than getting your butt kicked to the curb in the business context while you're trying to solve business problems. Anyways, this one was, that looks easy, we can do that, and it turned out to be a massive project. So that became the focus of that first business, was to build billing software to handle the deregulated energy market, where they had this notion that you could buy, like in analogy to the phone industry, you could buy your basic service from one company and long distance from another. So you could buy your power delivery service from one company and your electrons from another one. That was the concept in deregulating the energy markets.
Okay.
But as you know, you can't push a string, and that's how electricity works, and you can't store it. So it turned out to, implementation-wise, that law was effective in 1995, and they actually really only implemented it in 2005. They only implemented it partially. This is in Ontario, only partially. And in other jurisdictions like California, Texas, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, they had limited implementation. But the idea was that you could develop a custom rate schedule so you can negotiate with one of your big power customers a custom schedule, or for a home user, you could have different rates at peak times versus non-peak times. So the way the electricity grid works is, I'm sure many of us have been educated over the years, and with our government's decisions there, is that you have to basically have capacity to deal with the peak, and everything else is excess capacity. And
right.
And so you have nuclear base load. You want to keep the base load there, and they use gas plants to deal with the peaks. But in the real solution is to disincent people to use power during the peak. So in industrial, they have power rate usage meters, KVA kilowatt meters that are tracking the peak time, and they have shoulders and peak rates. And so if you're a steel mill, you would be incented to start at 6 and finish at 2, because your peak work would be off the overall grid peak. And so we peak here at I don't know what it is today, somewhere between 1:30 and 2, and somewhere between 5:30 and 6:30. So there's 2 peaks, and you want to make sure that you're not using power there, because they would actually have a punitive rate and charge you, maybe double what the going rate is. So they want to shift that to the off-peak time.
Right.
And so have a billing system to do that was what the market ask was. And so we worked with all kinds of different utilities. We got design specs, and it's a very complicated problem. You can there's never a good time to switch to a new system. So there was a system that would actually do a migration and a full parallel simulation. They had to run that continuously as they're trying to work through the different parts of the system. So that was a monumental challenge. We opted to do something that was fairly novel at the time, pretty standard now. Instead of writing all of the code for the routine screens, which were hundreds and hundreds, we wrote a code generator. That was my idea. I didn't have enough funding to do it. Where we had hundreds of thousands, we should have had another zero. It should have been millions to build the complete code generator. So the code generator would get you it was an 80-20, right? The easy 80% was 20% of the effort, and then incrementally it got more and more difficult as we tried to perfect everything. And in the end, to meet timelines, we ended up taking the generated code and then modifying it to complete the stuff that couldn't be generated. And now all of a sudden the code generator doesn't work anymore because you've forked the code off into a custom build. So that was an interesting learning. That was, as an entrepreneur, you learn all the time. And as I often say, I think I've made every mistake out there, but there's always tomorrow, right? And
so it's interesting as you're talking, about being a kid in Oakville, about university. A couple of times you referenced about you see the finish line, just getting to the finish line. I mean, is this a quality in yourself in terms of, is it a restlessness? Are you like really focused on objectives and then setting the next objective? I mean, how does your mindset work in terms of that? Because seems to be thematic, lots of energy,
interesting,
lots of sort of objectives out there you want to hit.
I've never sort of thought about this, but I do remember one of my professors said, you're different than the other ones because you're completion oriented. So
right.
I use that term in a different way because I found that, with few exceptions, when you hire staff that, they went to university but they didn't graduate, they tend to be the ones that aren't completion oriented. And I guess that I would put that back to my upbringing and my father. He was very much that. He put himself through Queens and Harvard on scholarships, came from a poor family, and you had to finish and go to the next. And so that was sort of probably, drilled into me in multiple different ways as I was growing up and just became who I am, I guess.
Now, in terms of the business world, right, you come out of a lot of engineering. You've just spoken about a ton of different engineering projects. So what's the sort of you're learning about the marriage between that sort of engineering mindset and approach and the business world?
Well, you'll know this term from your military background, perfection is the enemy of good enough.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
We need scientists to do scientist things and they have to be perfect. But in the business world, there's often, they're quite prepared to pay for good enough. And in fact, in engineering, as you know, the engineering method is, design, criteria, constraints, assumptions, alternate approaches, and you're making a compromise. Like there's a budget, or is usually a constraining factor, but you also have, you may have other objectives that you can't achieve. So if you can stay between those lanes and come up with 2 or 3 alternates, that just by virtue of having alternates, there's no perfect answer. So that's sort of thinking I bring into business all the time. Forward momentum is more important than getting it perfect. And you don't know what you don't know, so you got to get out there and test. And this is one of the challenges that we have in this, fast forward to today in software industry is the ready, aim, fire. It's ready, fire, aim often. Yeah. We're really bad in the Waterloo area because there's lots of us engineers here, and I can raise my hand as guilty as charged. But we have often we know how to solve the problem, and we build it, and we get venture money behind us, and then we have to go and get another round to correct the product for what the market really needs. And so instead of asking the questions on surveying the prospective buyer universe for the problem that you can solve, so software is always solving a problem of some sort, we go and build it and then try and fit it into places that it doesn't fit. So
right.
So there's numerous failures. I coach lots of CEOs and startups, and these are some of the things that if you can spend extra time and money to get that aim part right, and make sure that the design you have is characterizing the 80% customer, not that 20%, and off, like a lot of us CEOs will sit around in our round tables. We'll say, hey, I just got lucky because our prototypical customer was our first customer who helped us with all the design. It could have been the other guy, and it would have gone sideways. So there's lots of that, carnage on the entrepreneurial highway of people that have gone too hard, too deep. Building out, engineering is not cheap. Like software engineering is not cheap. No engineering is cheap. So if you get it wrong, it's expensive to backtrack.
Have you managed since sort of getting into the business world, finishing your formal education in engineering? Have you managed to weave in some of your past hobbies? You're in a band. You're talking about building things. Have you found a way to maintain any of those hobbies, or has it been very focused on building businesses?
No, I had quite a long skiing career, water skiing. Managed to get qualified to the nationals a few times, competed there, and that was a long time ago. And at 60, the body doesn't do what it did when it was 30. But
what was the most demanding thing on the body with water skiing? Because I'm not sure that a lot of people necessarily, other than the occasional time they might have.
Yeah, soft tissue. I don't know that you always hear about the people that I can go skiing and then they have torn hamstrings and they're black and blue on the back of their legs. But for me, it's been soft tissue, and I detached my bicep on this arm. One of my buddies is just recovering from that surgery on his other arm. That's one that happens a lot. Pretty much all of my ski homies that have been doing it for a while have scars on their shoulders, rotator cuff. Like you pick your soft tissue injury. That's generally what we get. And I'm mostly slalom. There's other disciplines like jumping where you hit something going 60 miles an hour and bones break. And
no doubt. One
of my friends, he stopped jumping. He competed at the pro level, world champion team, in fact, and he hadn't been jumping for a year, and he's down at a place in Florida, and they say, okay, he jumps over 200 feet, or did at the time. Why don't you get out there, see what you can do? And so he does, and it goes bad, and he broke his hip, ankle, and jaw in one crash, and so doesn't jump anymore.
What do you? It's interesting. It can be a whole bunch of things, but we're talking about sports right now. Any sense of what it is about people that don't see that time has maybe passed to do certain things like that, especially physical, that can really result in injury?
Yeah. You looking at me or?
No, well, I'm looking at you because you're the only one here. But is it because we talked about hockey earlier, and I know I have far too many friends to count who've inconsistently played rugby over the years and then went back at it and tore their Achilles doing that. I mean, any senses about what that sort of is?
Not acting your age is a part of it, and I think being male is another part of it, because we tend to see that more happen in males.
That's interesting.
You don't want to come to terms with reality.
Yeah, aging, mortality, things like that. Leading up to, and we'll talk about Esentire, your current business, but like, what were when you look back, what are some of the major things that you did that led you to that moment, to starting that company and to sort of getting to where you are now? Or there's some really sort of formative points in business career and engineering, things you learned along the way that allowed you to be in a good position to build that company into what it is today?
Okay, well, certainly there's a pattern there. So I had that first company. I sold that to Enbridge, became part of the executive team there.
This is the one you're talking about, with the billing.
The billing, And then, of course, so they were, like all energy companies, their strategic plan was, a copy of Enron's last year plan. Everyone was doing, all the deregulated stuff. They were deep into many different areas. Obviously Enron did things incorrectly, and so the financials looked better than they really were.
Right.
And that's why everyone else who was trying to do it the right way struggled. So we were buying. So they need a billing system for the small utilities. They only had a really big billing system for the consumer's gas part of Enbridge. They wanted to be you could blend in HVAC and mechanical into your home energy bill. That's part of the deregulation. So they were out buying those companies. They bought a water utility. This is all what Enron was doing. They bought an interconnect between NYPA, New York Power, Quebec, and Ontario, and Cornwall. So they had that's a sort of a prized asset. So they were making all of these acquisitions and rolling it up. And then the meltdown happened in energy. That was in 1999. So this is 2 years in. The wheels fall off, and we've got Y2K going on. So we're like the Y2K fix for all these
Y2K,
utilities that were built on 2-digit dates. And so the next year, the wheels fell off of the tech industry. So when the wheels fell off of the energy industry, Enbridge very systematically got out of all of those investments. It seems like it took them 5 or 8 years to get into them. I can't remember the exact ones, but it felt like they got out of them in 6 months. And so we were, we had acquired a tax billing company which had all these water utilities. So now we have water and electric, and we had a quarter of the province's tax bills. So they knew there was no way they could get out of that business until they got through the Y2K. And because, it was very, I learned lots about corporate risk management, and their brand was too important. So, we invested properly. We had a good Y2K program, didn't have a hiccup. We mitigated a lot of Y2K issues in this company we had acquired, which had been doing tax billing for 20 years on Unix platforms. So that was interesting. And then as soon as the dust settled, we went into the market. We got a banker that sells software companies, and we sold part of the business to a French organization that was trying to go public. And so there was, this was about 20 or 25% of the combined business, because they needed to go public. It was going to be on a European exchange. They needed to have a footprint of North American customers, and they had none. So we gave them that, which was, timing wise was interesting, because, the meltdown happened here, but it didn't happen over there nearly as quickly. So we were part of this IPO build up, and it was, they did all the right things with now. So our investment banker sells to them, and now we're dealing with bigger investment bankers, and then there was no IPO market. So we ended up not going public, and then took the half of the business that sold to the French company. The other half was the billing software, and they didn't want to let go of that. They wanted to keep it. So Enbridge retained that, and then we went off with the French with some, you'd call it CRM software now, which we had developed for utilities and city governments, and then blended that with their document management software. It was interesting trying to get the French to understand that, okay, like, I'm in the shadow of open text, and that's a 1,000-pound gorilla, and we can't, fight them head on. We have to, because that's how they were having success in Europe. We had to do it differently in North America. So that was an interesting journey, creating verticalized solutions. We had the records management. Do you remember the litigation in the Gulf War syndrome in the U.S.?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so that actually led to a standard called DoD 5015.2, which is how you actually do records, official records management. So we actually implemented that and sold that as a solution. And that would work for city governments and utilities and freedom of information and private sector. So that became that business.
Let's talk about your current company. Where did the name come from, Esentire?
Okay, I can't take credit for that. So we're about 23 years old now. So in 2001, when the founders, there was two of them, were trying to come up with a name, they needed to have something that was sounded like security. So Sentry or whatever, but Sentire in Italian means to sense all or feel all. So that seemed to make, that made some kind of sense. If you're like a technical dude that was doing forensic analysis, you kind of got to listen or feel the wire.
Right.
And then everything had an E in front of it back then, if you remember.
Right.
And probably most importantly, esentire.com was available. So as a domain name. So that was how the name came about. I can say that we grew into that name. I joined in 2010, and I was doing some, call it knife and fork advisory for them for 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 before that, as an emerging business. But we grew into that name around the time when I was joining. Like there was a lot of things in motion to get there, and we created a capability that we could take a tap of the internet connection into and out of the business, and we would and I'll try to keep this non-technical, but we would take a copy of it, and we would inspect it, and we would judge it for what things that you could programmatically say are nefarious and stop it, or something that would cause an analyst to raise an eyebrow and then do a forensic level investigation. So when I walked into the office, day one, there's all these screens with like hex dumps and guys reading it like it's regular English and,
right.
and looking for
something out of the Matrix.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Looking for the payloads. It's still that way today, but it's much more sophisticated. But that was the reason I joined is probably worth talking about. I saw a pattern in a completely different domain that they were solving, and the pattern was the customers in this other domain needed a solution for. I'll explain a little bit. It was in the major capital projects world where they're building offshore oil rigs or nuclear plants or something.
Big construction.
Everything $1 billion and larger would use this software. The average scope creep was 40% if you're over $1 billion, usually related to geotechnical lack of information or changes. And so we had software.
So when you say scope creep, are you talking strictly in terms of going over budget, or are you talking about actually Yeah. Okay.
The work effort would change by that much.
Gotcha.
So and they all and we had all the way up to the biggest one in the world, which was a project that Chevron was doing in off of Australia, which is like $45 billion or something. Build a village, build a wharf, build an undersea network of pipes and all that kind of stuff, and liquid natural gas compressors, and so those teams that would come together to do that wouldn't actually necessarily just be Chevron. Like an offshore oil rig was a joint venture. So they hedged themselves. So everybody had a piece of everybody else's. So if you have a dry hole, as they call it, you're in there with BNP Paribas and Exxon. And so you had all these teams. And what they needed, these were like 5-year projects to get it built, and then operating was a different thing. So we did the get it built part. They needed somebody to come in and do project cost control. They needed someone to come in and do project document control, project contract control. They didn't need software. They needed the person, and they needed the person had to, like a mechanic shows up with his Snap-on toolbox. They needed someone to show up with whatever tools. So the weapon of choice was Excel and Microsoft Project or Primavera. And so we had a better mousetrap, and our mousetrap would we could take overages and manage schedules much tighter. Like we had every single business case where there was a 40% overage. We could take 10% of the 40% out, and that would pay for the software 50 times over. But that was so you'd think this is a no-brainer. We had success selling, but I saw a company in Europe. They had 50 software guys and 550 project controllers and cost controllers. And when you put one of these projects together, they'd say, I need 3 cost controllers and 2 document guys for 3 years in Indonesia, right? And they would put them out there, and they would show up with their software, the competitor software, and the team, and they would charge the hourly rate or the daily rate included the software. So what they were basically doing, and this directly relates to the way we do cybersecurity, they were supplying complex technology with people trained on it, and deliver and managing all of that for the customer. So they basically could just get on with doing the work, not having to worry about standing up systems or anything like that. So fast forward. So I saw that pattern. I saw what Esentire was doing. They didn't have the self-awareness on this particular area. So that's what I saw was the opportunity. I said, this is a very complex and changing. That was the difference. Cybersecurity changes very rapidly. The problem changes very rapidly. And the customers, they actually just in the initial customer set at Esentire, it was hedge funds and buy side. They just wanted the problem solved. They didn't want to have to stand up a team of cyber guys to run 24/7, because they had trading in London and Singapore and New York, and it was complex. So we showed up with basically a black box, plug firewall in on both sides, and then we would do all our stuff remotely. So the problem was deliver it remotely. So we would have the advanced cyber analysts do all of this remotely. We would solve the problem for the customer. We could have basically instant on. Literally a matter of days after they signed a contract, we'd have them defended. The original buyer persona, this is now 2010, was we're a liquid alt investment vehicle. What that means is our limited partners, our investors, can give us 90 days notice and pull $200 million out of our fund. If we have anything like a cyber breach that would potentially scare them, they could pick up their $200 million and go to someone else who has the same strategy that has better cybersecurity controls. So our reputation is the most important thing, and we need to protect the money, because hedge funds get paid on managing the funds and generating a return. And if you don't have the funds, you can't get paid, right? So this was fundamental to their business, and we solved that problem extremely well. We had at the time, there's a company called Dell SecureWorks. Michael Dell owns Dell Computing. SecureWorks was a division of them. We had MSD Capital, which was his $12 billion hedge fund, using us to secure it, not the company he owned. And everyone in New York knew that. So it was that was the great thing. When they went public, I remember the CTO phone. He said, you guys have been awesome, but there's no way that could ever be known that we're not using SecureWorks in Michael's fund. So that was the end of that relationship. But anyways, it was a very tight market. Everyone had the same problem. They helped us build the solution. We put lots of engineering into it. And basically what we did at the time was heresy. This is what happens with destructive technologies. We saw that the problem was changing so fast that IT organizations doing patching and updates could not keep up with the threat. The threat was changing by the day, and they were doing policy changes by the month or by the week.
Right.
And so the problem needed us to get in there and effectively change policies by the minute or by the hour. And so large IT organizations were not receptive to this. They did not like us effectively changing firewall rules on the fly. But that's actually how you solve the problem, because the adversary gets first mover advantage. They get a vote, as you say. Like every battle plan in your prior life is great until you engage with the adversary and they get a vote, and it could change everything. And so we live that every single day. That's our Tuesday, right? It's a very normal for us. So rather than sort of reject that, how do you embrace it and use that as a design point? So for us, our mission was to prevent business-altering breaches. We would only be technically looking at something that had got past your firewall. So everything that we're looking at is already potentially a breach in process, but they take time to complete. This is where we get into some of the military jargon, the kill chain. So we have the cyber kill chain. Lockheed Martin came up with the term. They are actually in our office in 2012 showing us this new thing, trying to figure out how we could work with them. So when a bad guy gets into a network, I'll try and make this non-technical. Bad guy gets into a network. Most often today, they're invited in by a human, clicking a link on a website or opening a document that has a payload embedded into it, a piece of malware inside the document that you can't see, and then it does a bunch of things. It would try to, in some cases, drop a file onto your file system, and then that file starts running, and then it's doing reconnaissance, and it's picking up all kinds of telemetry. Then it's connecting back to its mothership, the evil layer of the adversary. So we call that command and control, and it's exfiltrating information to the command and control. And then the adversary is making a decision. It might say, oh, well, you've got McAfee antivirus. I'll put this other payload down there to turn that off so I can get around it. Okay. And so all this back and forth. What I just described there is probably 8 to 10 different detection opportunities. And so we said we'll get really good at detecting. And then once we've detected it, we have to be able to apply countermeasures. And the countermeasures, the D's in the kill chain, ours are basically disrupt. Our main one is disrupt. We don't have to do more than that because it's highly effective. So the bad guys generally are only doing what they're doing through the internet. They are trying to basically move laterally in the network, escalate privileges, and get to the system admin or the root credential so that they can do what they need to do to complete their objectives. So we focus on getting up to that point. After they've completed their objectives, it's a whole other problem. And so our mission is to disrupt them before they complete the last step in their kill chain. So the kill chain might be 15, it could be 25 motions. And we have a detection apparatus. Now, like to think we get all 25, but we're probably getting 20 of them, and they're highly motivated to evade, but they can't evade all of the time. You cannot put traffic on a network undetected, or if you can, it's probably government level tradecraft, and it's basically impossible to do it. There will be evidence one way or another. So we have focused all of our detection capabilities on the motions that they're using to establish persistence. That's when they can basically communicate externally and get more instructions, and then your business risk is elevated. So between when they get in and they finish what they're doing, and I'm talking business networks here, 53% of the time is completed in 12 hours. That's a stat is probably a year out of date. We have, for years, we've used 20 minutes to mean time to contain, or 30 minutes mean time to contain. We're actually getting better at that. We're a little under 20 now. So from first detection to disrupting their connection. So if they're coming through a network connection, we can block the connection surgically. If we think they've taken over the laptop or the workstation or server, we can isolate the entire server from the network. If it's out in the cloud, the thing that they are working with is credentials, and we can suspend the credential or revoke the credential. So those are all the basic countermeasures that we can apply. It's basically find them, get conviction, block them, and if we do that, and our North Star is 15 minutes mean time to contain, which is now serving us really well, because we have many competitors that would still be in the hours. Some of the sort of going back a few years, they would get you in the next day alert, right? And but not taking the countermeasure. So we had to explain this to. There's a whole community of analysts, technical analysts that are subscribed to by many buyers, and Gartner, Forrester. You might have heard of IDC. Those are some of them, and the vendors ourselves work with them to educate them on what our capabilities are, and they will create categories and they will rank you. It's a bit of a beauty pageant, and one way or another. It's important in the industry, and I spent $50,000 a year with Gartner telling them they were wrong. That they would say, MSSPs, managed security service providers, which are basically business process outsourcers. It's just jokingly call it your mess for less, but that you take all your network and security needs, and you get a third party to do it from often a low cost region. So that's not what we do. We are actually don't manage devices. They're all about managing devices. We actually manage the threats, and when the threat gets in, it's game on, and we're 15 minutes mean time to contain. You don't get it, and told them wrong. Then in 2016, they came out with this MDR market guide, and they said there's a new form of managed security, and we've identified these 10 companies. We were one of those, and the other one was one that Google bought. So Mandiant. So we were a couple of these firms doing security in this very different way, and it was all outcomes based. And the outcome was, you're not done until you've either contained the adversary or confirmed that they didn't get in. And so then the rest of the journey is build the business so you can optimize investigation, conviction, decision. Next, and so we manage our customers like one big customer, and it gives you phenomenal scale when you can do it this way. So they're all individual tenants. You have to keep all the privacy stuff in mind, but we can take motions, from Ireland or Waterloo, where our two security operations centers are, equally effective at an aerospace. Engineering firm building parts in a supply chain, to a hedge fund in New York, a large food processor, a water utility. Like, you pick your sector. Law firms are the biggest doing this for law firms. Law firms are a target because they tend to pay on ransoms, which is the new threat du jour, where they will encrypt your operations, and every hour you can't bill, like you can't get it back, right? So they're highly motivated to pay. So now we've become the largest in the world supplying law firms, and we got some of the largest law firms as customers, because not only are they have a double whammy. One is they have to bill hours. Everyone has to do hours, but theirs is acutely painful when they can't bill them. But then they also have this data, which is they're a nexus of proprietary, non-public information. Right. So the adversary's main method is today exfiltrate all the proprietary information to some site they've got, then encrypt the operations, demand that ransom. They pay that and they say, oh, by the way, we stole all your data. You have to pay another ransom for us not to share that. And to a large extent, they're good on their word, but like you're dealing with a criminal. So,
So when for the apportionment of business, I mean, is most of your business in Canada? Is most of your business outside of Canada?
No. We're very much U.S. dominant, 80%. We've got global operations, but if you were asking me this before we moved over to go after Europe and other markets, we were 95% U.S.
So why is that? Is it a different culture in terms of viewing the problem, the threats, taking things seriously?
They recognize the risk. It's interesting. There's get me on a soapbox here. In Canada,
I'm hoping to.
Yeah. In Canada, well, let's say Rush and Guess Who had to go to the U.S. to get famous, and once it's good down there, to a large extent, same is probably true with BlackBerry. The test was in Ontario with the Mobitex network, and they got success there, and then it took off down the States, and everyone later was buying. So it's like we have this. If it came from Canada, it can't be any good. If you look into our government, and this is, not so much that we need the government to buy our stuff to be successful, but the government sets a tone. And I remember meeting with the former CIO.
Of the Canadian government.
So he had like the 29 or whatever CIOs under him, and he said, I won't name him, but he's not there anymore. But he said that I understand the problem, but our procurement systems are biased to 3-letter companies and not from Canada, right. And it makes me cry, but that's the way it is. So we've got a systemic procurement model. So someone did some analysis in cybersecurity spending. And Canada spends 3 times less on domestic capabilities than any other country in the peer group, which was like the G7 or something, right? So we buy mostly from other countries, and so when I go to the U.S. and we're doing a sale with a U.S. government customer, we have some. We don't really target the market, but they say, so what are the government agencies in Canada using it? Well, actually none. But we've got all these U.S. ones using it, and we use that as our reference base. So it's a bit embarrassing. I've been to Ottawa on, I can't even count the number of first dates, meeting with all the right people to make this change, and it hasn't yet. And I'm not alone. I'm part of the Canadian Council of Innovators. This is an organization that Jim Basile and John Ruffalo started to advocate to the government. It's lobbying, I guess, technically, and we are trying to affect change. Got to get access to customers, get access to talent, get access to capital. Those are sort of the 3 pillars, and it's there's a lot of good that has come. I think they're getting listened to now. The organization has got considerable size, so it's basically targeting CEOs and execs. I think we're probably 250 or 300 now across Canada, in technology ranging from medical technology to what we're doing to other silicon-based technologies. And we've got intellectual property that we need to keep in the country, and that there's risk with and we're in this mix where someone from the U.S. could come in, or typically U.S. Other country, buy the technology and the patents and move them out of Canada, and then generate the profit in the headquarters company and not in Canada. So a lot of the building of these companies, all the tax credits we get with SR&ED and all the other programs end up, they return something, but they could return a lot more if we kept it in Canada. So these are some of the things that is challenging in the tech sector right now are the capital gains. You've heard all about that.
Yep.
It's been in the news. It's still a bit indeterminate at this point in time, but companies systematically redomiciled all of their IP out of Canada to the U.S. so they could generate gains at a lower tax rate, and that has happened in I can't count the number of peer firms of ours that's happened in. So we've got that's more of mortgaging the future kind of impact than something that might be really noticeable today. And I think if we get back to understanding how important it is for we are a resource economy. And we are a service economy. Like everywhere we go in the world, we're highly regarded for our technical capabilities, except in our own country, and it's embarrassing. And so I've been involved with Tom Jenkins and a bunch of us he was the Open Tech CEO back in the late 90s, early 2000s. We're on this drumbeat, but we just haven't been able to get this ball moving.
So. I guess I got a couple of questions here, and it's probably no different than a number of other issues that Canada faces. I mean, I obviously have a lot of attention on the defense and security side, and that's where my passion is. But why is it not compelling to the elected officials? And why should Canadians really care about this? And I say that because people live busy lives. Why is cybersecurity something that they should actually pay attention to and demand better, because it's important to, as you said, mortgaging the future. It's important to their future, their children's futures. Why should they care about this issue? Well,
if we dive into the existential threat, we have critical infrastructure that is woefully unsecure.
When you say critical infrastructure, Jay, specifically
electric grid,
right?
Gas. Food supply, logistics, finances, absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Telecom, how you do finance doesn't work without telecom now, right? Because only 9% of currency is physical now. It's all electronic. So we've got the U.S. has this too. I was at a briefing by this would be back in around end of April, by the just retired head of counter threat from the CIA in the U.S. And he basically said it's unequivocal the amount of beachheads that our adversaries have in our critical infrastructure. And this is the U.S., which actually spends money on this and is worried about it. And it would be a really bad day if they ever decide to pull the trigger. I think there's the mutual assured destruction kind of thing. The cyber version of that that is keeping it from happening, but they all know it's there. And the difference here is we don't seem to have that same awareness. And so I was up in Ottawa briefing all of the colonels and higher in the Air Force on cyber threats. Here it is from a commercial perspective. I started out the discussion saying if I was in the U.S., I'd be sitting in the audience and you would be giving this briefing. And they didn't quite get the magnitude of that, I don't think, but it might have made more sense as I talked. And we've worked with, we've hired a bunch of, we had Gus Hunt, who was the former head of the CIA as a CTO. So he's the head of all technology there. And then Ronnie Hawkins, not to be confused with the musician, he was the 3-star that did threat hunting in the U.S. networks.
Okay.
And so, to try and look at our methods and techniques to see how they compare. And one of the things that Ronnie told me was, he said, everyone thinks the military threat is, the other nations, but we have all of the opportunistic cyber criminal hackers in our networks too, like trying to steal stuff to quickly sell and access is fungible in a community where someone can monetize it, right? So he said we had all of that, plus we had the nation state problem, and what you have would be the envy of the U.S. military in terms of because we're generally dealing with, I'd say 95% of the time, we know we're dealing with opportunistic cyber criminals, and there's another part where you don't know who is at the other end. The interesting thing is the whole supply chain in cyber threats has dramatically morphed since when I joined here in 2010. There was very distinct tradecraft and methods. Low and slow was the government approach. Exfil data only, and don't be seen. and leave, and nobody knows you were there. That's sort of the MO. And then the cyber criminals are, smash a window, grab some stuff. We don't really care. They leave evidence because they had so much success. There was no benefit to them cleaning up their trail. So, fast forward to today, there's a supply chain of folks that know how to get in, folks that know how to get the prize, and then other ones that know how to sell it or monetize it. And it's this sort of supply chain, frictionless. There's no laws or rules or contracts. An ICQ chat or equivalent will establish a business relationship in 2 minutes. Okay, I'm in here. Can you guys monetize a bank? I don't know anything about banking software. Oh yeah, I got 3 bank guys, and so they get in and do their thing, and now they've ransomed it, and now there's another group that is going to then figure out how to get money out of it, and the tradecraft to get in is so effective that nation states, when they go in, if they ever get detected, they're giving up a lot of their tradecraft. It's expensive. Stuxnet being an extreme example, that story with the Iranian centrifuge as well. So why should we do that when we can just use the opportunistic cyber criminal techniques, because they can get in just about all the time in all the places we need to go to. So we're not giving up any of our MO, and we can basically ride in the wake of regular criminals, and nobody knows. So that's why I said we don't know now what the objectives are of the adversaries. And our whole mission is kind of interesting. We actually never let them get to the end, so they can't expose themselves. So we have another part of the business that does incident response, and it's generally for non-customers where they've been compromised. They need us to put Humpty back together, and then right. We will pick up adversary identities there. But generally, we don't get that far if we're doing our job right, we never see it.
Okay. So what's really at risk for the average Canadian with Canada's approach to cyber being lackadaisical? I don't know what the right word is, but certainly behind maybe our allies and vulnerable to our adversaries. So what's a risk for the average Canadian if not making this a ballot box issue?
Well, from a supply chain perspective, I think this is one that I see time and again. If you remember the meat crisis a couple of years ago, we got that customer after that happened. The extent of a supply chain disruption, like look at what happened with toilet paper and COVID, right? And you would have you could disrupt, because if you know how our food is, a lot of it's just in time from especially in the winter, all the fruits and vegetables and stuff from the south. That could be disrupted very easily, and there's multiple points where it could be disrupted. Taking power grids down, bricking financial systems. If you were to go after, something like our stock exchanges, which have extensive security controls, if you were to go after them, there's so much of our currency and settlement system. If you actually understand, we balance in Canada, it may be unique, but it's certainly very advanced. We balance to the penny every day across all financial institutions, stock market trades, and everything. And anything that doesn't balance gets rolled back and resolved the next day. And they do not close the markets. There's a 45-minute period after end of trading where all the settlements have to get finalized. If it doesn't get settled, it's pulled out so it stays in balance. And so if you went after something that targeted that, and we couldn't close or balance, then you have open-ended books, and you'd never ever be able to reconcile it. So it would create chaos. So I think we have versions that are terribly inconvenient to something worse, like drinking water. I don't know if you've heard the stat that they can't evacuate New York City before people start dying of thirst fast enough if all the water was cut off there. I
hadn't heard that.
Yeah, that might be a little dated. That's like a 10-year-old stat, but I don't think they've done anything to change that. They have a big, huge pipe coming in, but if somehow that got disrupted or you couldn't get water, that people die of thirst in a shorter period of time than food. So that a motivated adversary could exert those kinds of actions against us, and it would be a degrading initially, but disrupting to as you go down their version of the kill chain. So it I think is real. We don't take it seriously enough. We don't have any sort of inducement. And if you look at, and there's things that are coming though. It's interesting. If you look at why should I spend money on cybersecurity? It's just cost. There's no upside. If you get hacked and you're under 100 people, you have like a 1 in 3 chance of never recovering, and you'll get degraded or deprecated to some level. You may never get back to where you were, so you'll lose that. And the average breaches are, depending on what stat you use, between 3.5 and 5 million. So it's real money. If you suffer something like that, and you are in a supply chain, and you're upstream to Ford if you're in the automotive industry, or Loblaws if you're in food distribution, then you affect their business. And the way contracts are written now in supply chain contracts with just in time is if you cause a stoppage at your ultimate customer, you're going to pay for it. And like in the automotive industry, there's like 10 days of supply in the pipe. And if you're out of business because of a cyber incident, more than 10 days and you can't fulfill, then you're going to pay for every day that Ford can't put pickup trucks out, right? Or Loblaws can't put their stuff on the shelf. So this is the sort of impact. So what's happening if you look at what's happened in the U.S. In the military supply, there's a standard that's coming, CMMC, and it basically has a set of controls based on NIST, which is, we have a very similar version. And at least some of the lobbying, I think, has helped. We said, don't try and make a Canadian one. Just copy the U.S. one and put a maple leaf on it. I call it Maple NIST, but which is what we've done. And that way, there's interchange between the economies. Like you've seen versions of this in the military as well, I'm sure. So they've got these new standards that are coming that you have to be this tall to take the ride, and if you don't pass the CMMC standards, then you can no longer supply us. And that is something that we're going to have to come to terms with, because the way that DFARS works in the U.S., all those flow-through terms go to, from the prime contractor all the way down. So there's 10,000 in the U.S. supply chain. Many of them are, there's probably 1,000 Canadian companies in that chain, right? And so you're going to have to fit into that. And if you're a supplier to one of them, they're going to push that to you. So you've got this whole connected chain of people that are putting controls in place, and whether they go to the same level as our customers with the full detect and respond 24/7 active, at least they'll have a much more sophisticated environment than they presently have. So I think that's a good thing. We're going to complain. Businesses will say, well, this is just a tax on us, but it's going to be, no, this is a hunting license. If you don't do it, you're not allowed to sell to them anymore. So preserving existing revenue, and more importantly, acquiring new revenue, will become this, and this is the right way to do it. It's it's a stick. There's no carrot here. The carrot is you can get new business. Right. The stick is you lose current stuff.
Everyone knows there's going to be an election at some point in the next sort of 12 to 18 months here in Canada. We'll see when that is. But if you were providing advice, Jay, to the federal parties and the campaign, they were going to talk about cyber. I mean, what's one thing you would really stress to them is that we need to do in Canada to buy down this threat and protect Canadians?
The mechanism to get there, I don't have ideas, because we've been working on this for a long time, and I've had many meetings in Ottawa. In fact, I have a fairly important one coming up next month. I think that we have to come to terms with the fact that we are a branch economy to the U.S. and as long as they trust that it's safe to do business with us, things will continue as they are. If, for example, and you know how social media can amplify the wrong message, if, for example, we become unsafe to do business with because we don't have proper cyber controls, and that becomes some message in the U.S. and politicians down there rally around it, that's the last thing that we need. And I think we got to get ahead of this, and we have to figure out the mechanism by which to incent companies. There's been some attempts that haven't really changed behavior. We have to incent companies to take this risk seriously, and not everyone's going to go to best practices, but we have many that are nascent. They don't even know what they don't know. They're not self-aware, and I think there's probably an education component to it, and then how what inducements can you use to change behavior. I don't want to get into how policies would work with tax credits. I've heard that proposed a bunch of times. I don't know if it works or not, but we've got to take this more seriously. And unfortunately, the world reacts after the incident versus beforehand. And I think we're going to unfortunately have to suffer something like that. And it could be disruptive to our lives. I can't predict where, but think critical infrastructure. We have a lot of exposure, and I think that's something I don't hear it talked about. One thing I'm involved with is there's the G7 in Canada next year, and there's the T7, which is all the digital ministers get together and basically get the agreement on position statements for the G7 leaders. And I'm chairing the host country chairs that committee. For the upcoming one, and I don't know what message we're going to have there, but that message is going to be our collective G7 partners. We should be aligned with it, and I think that might set a bit of the tone for what the next election could speak about. So I'm excited to be a part of it. I have to temper my expectations on success, because these things it's a long journey. But we've had a lot of messaging to the leaders right at the highest level, and I think there's opportunity for them to respond. Is it going to change the voter decisions? I doubt it, but I would say that it's certainly is something that if they're not talking about, then they would seem to be asleep at the switch. So I think they'll all have some opinion on it.
I mean, one of the things that I'm always interested in, maybe this is a good sort of closing one, because it is leadership management. You've been involved with a lot of companies, and building these from scratch. Joining companies. What are some of the things you've learned in terms of leadership management over the years that have really worked for you?
I think that's a great question. The first phase, you're unconsciously but competent in a way, and then I went to West Point twice for leadership training, and that made me conscious and competent. So one of the things that I've always maintained prior to going to West Point, in fact, is that the people closest to the problem know the answer 80% of the time. And they probably know the other 20%, but they don't know that they know it. And if you are a micromanager and controlling your team, that limits your ability to lead and grow. You have to get the best out of the people closest to the problem. And the only way you can do that is empower them. And you have to give them decision-making frameworks. This sounds more complicated than it is. You basically have to set them free and make them feel that they're empowered to solve problems. And you'd be surprised what comes out of that. I'm surprised every day when new ideas come out of people closest to the problem, because we've created a culture of, if you have a good idea, bring it forward. Like we're not going to tell you what it is. And I think when you get, in cybersecurity, the bad guys get first mover advantage, so you always have to react, and there's no way you can anticipate what they're going to do. So if you take that as your sort of design point, then you have to be a fast follow, and you can't be everywhere all the time. Like we have 600 staff, like we just can't be everywhere all the time as leaders. So you have to empower or trust your team to make those decisions. So I went to West Point, maybe that was 7 or 8 years ago, for leadership training, and we were introduced to VUCA as a new methodology for how they manage their manage all the teams, the entire chain. And it's stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it came about as a result of 9/11, because they had no idea it was going to happen. And it basically deals with asynchronous scenarios. Most of battle planning is sort of anticipating synchronous engagement. It's anticipating adversaries embedded with your allies, and oftentimes communications or chains of command are broken, and you can't have the person at the front line waiting for a signal or direction from their leader if they can't communicate. So you have to empower them to make the decision as though they were the leader. And so we spent a bunch of time studying VUCA. I actually went there once, and then I decided this was so in line with what the problem that we're solving was I brought my whole leader team there. We did our own custom program. I worked with General Hernandez and putting the program together. Yeah. So General Hernandez, he was the 2-star that built Desert Shield. He had 17,000 IT guys. That's a big network, and that's why it took 6 months. So they basically stood up, not a small city, a big city, and so I talked to him. I said, how do you know when the dude at the front line is doing what you think? I said, I do skip levels. I'll skip 4 levels, and I make that part of the culture so that my direct leaders and their leaders aren't afraid of me doing the skip level, because if the front line private doesn't understand, then that's not a failing on me. That's a failing on all of this process. So so their leaders should welcome it and that will sort of ensure that directions are given and understood, and mindset and framing is understood. So that was really helpful. Trust but verify. So we do skip levels all the time. It's just part of our culture. We were doing it before, but make it safe to do it. You've got to tell your leaders, hey, this is what's going to happen. Don't be afraid of it. It's actually to your benefit. And for me, if I'm not giving the direction the right way, then I gotta check myself. If my leaders aren't, if it's, by the time it gets to the 3rd or 4th level down, if they're me a 90-degree turn, then I've done something wrong. So it's very different than you think of military, right? And you probably had some similar experiences in our military, but I found that very useful in business. And the only way you can scale and move fast, and we went through 100% growth years with this company. That's a new business every 13 weeks, like every quarter, is to, you got to lean on your team and get the best out of them.
Yeah. Trust but verify is one of my favorite, one of my favorite sort of expressions and mantras. Yeah. Absolutely. And what a great way to wrap this up. Jay, thank you for having me into your home, taking the time today to share some of your history and talk about cybersecurity and being one of our Northern Sentinels.
Well, appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully some tidbit of that's useful to someone else. And the scar tissue being shared is always something I welcome.
Thanks again. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jay. Please subscribe to The Greater Good on Substack to get this and other content to help you citizen better. Thanks for listening, and goodbye until next time.